Now let's look at how Nigeria is tackling corruption. Nigeria is likely one of the most active countries worldwide in its effort to recover its assets looted through corruption. Tackling corruption is one of the cardinal points of the Muhammadu Buhari administration. And since coming into power in 2015, it has deployed great resources towards recovering funds and other assets looted by past leaders. Over the past 3 years, the Nigerian government has vocally asked foreign governments where Nigerian stolen assets are allegedly hidden to make more efforts to help recover them. The Abacha loot is still coming in tranches from countries where huge amounts of public funds are stashed, amongst others. There is even a whistleblower policy in place to encourage Nigerians to assist governments with vital information that will help in recovering looted assets. But accusations and counter-accusations have been flying over the management of recovered assets. Executive Director, Africa Network for Environment and Economic Justice, David Ogolo, joins me via Skype from Benin City. Good morning, David. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast. David, can you hear me? Good morning. Good morning, David Ogolo. Can you hear me?
Yes, are you seeing me?
Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Hello.
All right, now the question is, there was a recent report, I need to get your reaction to this report, that Nigeria loses $18 billion every year to tax evasion, money laundering, and other snatching of illegal proceeds, making us the worst illicit financial flows offender in Africa. I know that you have been at the heart of all of the management, monitoring how Nigeria has been making efforts to recover illicit financial flows and recover funds, especially that of the Abacha loot. Talk to us, seeing this report. How does this make the efforts we have made so far?
Very much. The effort made so far is about the president who have put in place a framework in absence of a proceed of crime bill that would have led to an act that would provide the architecture in Nigeria. But unfortunately, that proceed of crime bill has not been passed into law. In absence of that, government have gazetted a framework that now guides the operations of the federal government on asset recovery. And that, for me, provides a stopgap. But beyond that, the political will that the government has provided so far, by making sure that the Ministry of Justice work closely with countries where assets are to be repatriated back to Nigeria, has been wonderful. But the most important thing is that some of the assets that has been returned, particularly the Abacha through, which is the $321.5 million, has led to a kind of a sea change in terms of perceptions about how recovered assets should be used for social development. And in this instance, it has been used for supporting the social sector, particularly going to the poorest of the poor in Nigeria, and who happens to have monitored this. But the legal framework that has not provided the overall direction for the country is a major concern, and this is what we have always raised with the government. Even the international community, through the United Nations Convention Against Corruption framework, that Nigeria need to put in place a framework that will help strengthen asset recovery and management in the country. You have seen what has happened with asset management with EFCC, ICPC. I am happy that now all the anti-corruption agencies are currently working together to at least give the framework some legitimacy that will enhance confidence in the international community.
Now,
I feel very strongly that when government are given this opportunity, it will really be very good. And that's why we are saying that first, government should create this potential that will enable the other partners, the other international partners, like countries like Switzerland, United States, Britain, to continue to have confidence in our system. So the law that needs to be created is the Proceeds of Crime Bill. And that is the best practice internationally. And then government will be able to demonstrate that they are complying with the Global Forum on Asset Recovery, which is GFA principles. And those principles provides a standard that which this government can easily send the right signal to the international community.
Now, one wonders the level of engagement that CSOs like yours are having with government to push that this Proceeds of Crime Bill is passed, to ensure that it is pushed forward so that we can have that legal framework. Because, like you have pointed out, a lot of persons are concerned that accountability and transparency in the management of recovered assets is seemingly missing. And if we are saying that we are fighting corruption, we should by now understand that this legal framework is very, very important.
Framework is very important. Our expectation is that the current National Assembly will do the necessary. And I'm happy that, again, the President, through the Ministry of Justice, have again re-represent the bill to the National Assembly. And I am confident that the current leadership of the National Assembly will do the necessary by making sure that this legal framework is put in place, because it will help, again, address the grand corruption issues in the country. Like I also stated very clearly that asset return is increasingly becoming a source of financing for the developing country, particularly country like Nigeria. And in the face of the coronavirus, every countries are looking for the best way to have resources to finance development. And I think Nigerian government will be, again, sending the right signal to the partners around the world that wherever asset is found, Nigerian government has put in place a legal framework that will attract the support that is required.
Now, aside the legal framework, there are those who are advocating for a central database on all assets recovered, and that also could ensure the transparency and accountability that we have been speaking about. But we would recall that sometime last year, the government established a central database. How far have we used that to addressing issues of transparency? David, can you hear me? David, if you can hear me, I was saying that there are those who are saying that aside the legal framework that you have pointed out, that there is the need to establish a central database for all assets recovered. And you would recall that sometime last year, the government established a central database. How have we used that to addressing issues of transparency and accountability?
That was a very groundbreaking innovation in the asset recovery architecture in Nigeria. Particularly, I must commend the leadership of the Asset Recovery Management Unit under Ladidi and the Attorney General. First, they have put in place this. We work closely with the Ministry of Justice through the agency, the Asset Recovery Management Unit. And that central database system has been designed in a way that the whole controversy we have had with assets associated with EFCC and ICPC can be avoided. And even sometimes when the National Assembly members are carrying out their independent public inquiry, they will be able to access such data very easily. And even internationally, the government will be able to present a data on how assets recovered are utilized within the country. And then it will create trust between Nigeria and our partner countries. So the central database is there, and the asset recovery management unit is managing it. And recently, you also heard that last year the president set up a presidential committee to dispose of all assets recovered by the anti-corruption agency. Now, this is possible because this central database system has also been put in place. And the committee is currently working to see that all the assets recovered from anti-corruption cases across the country that has already been forfeited finally to the government are sold in a transparent and accountable way. And now, one unique innovation about this is the inclusion of civil society. And that, again, reflects government commitment to the GIFA principle that I think is a right step. But the question is that, how do we broaden this to include a more broad civil society, more broad legislative framework? And that's why we are encouraging the government deeply. And this is some kind of research we carried out with the support from the European Union and the British Council. And we are very happy that we have put up this policy brief on the necessity for government to move forward with a very good policy framework under the Proceeds of Crime Bill, so that at least it becomes institutional. It's not an ad hoc process, because today the regime of President Buhari will come to an end, and the best way to remember him and his legacy around the asset recovery regime in Nigeria is to put in place a legal framework like the Proceeds of Crime Bill. And globally, the best practice is to put in a framework that will go beyond regime.
How will this legal framework change, or perhaps change rather the fight against corruption? How would it tighten the noose around the fight that we have been trying to achieve when it comes to fighting corruption? How would it also drive transparency and accountability? Because a lot of persons want to understand that. We have had legal framework, but then when it comes to implementation and seeing results of this legal framework we always speak about, a lot of Nigerians believe that is always a far cry from what we thought it would be.
Yes, I completely share the concerns of Nigeria, and particularly against the background where we live in the 21st century of informations are real time. The way the media picks up anti-corruption cases and grand corruption cases is more faster these days. And so when you look the rate at which corruption cases are reported and then the ones and assets recover, they don't correlate. And so you begin to have that perception problem, and particularly against the background that each year when Transparency International releases their corruption perception index, and Nigerians do not perform very well there, again paints a very bad picture for Nigeria. But unfortunately, the perception corruption index doesn't capture the actual work the Nigerian government is doing around asset recovery. And asset recovery is an important component of fighting corruption at the grand scale level. And so what I will say is that the Nigerian government need to put their house in order to communicate to Nigerians how the anti-corruption cases they are dealing with, particularly in the areas of asset recoveries, are properly presented to the Nigerian people, because the issue of trust and perception is very important in fighting corruption. And also, the government have responsibility to demonstrate that fighting corruption is beneficial to the people, and particularly how the government have used the Abacha loot and then other loot recovered in the country. There are a number of loot beyond Abacha that government have recovered, but unfortunately, the only one Nigerians are familiar with is Abacha, and that's not too good for this government. Government has recovered loot and assets from different politically exposed persons in the country, not just the Abacha family alone. And I think the government will do themselves good if they begin to again build a communication strategy around to send the right signal, and then that will again encourage the Nigerian people to support the anti-corruption fight in Nigeria. And the president has responsibility to present leadership in all this, because at the end of the day, the president will be judged if he performed very well. Because if you recall, when the president was campaigning for his second re-election, one of the key issues that the president emphasized on was the issue of fighting corruption. And I think that the better way to to again communicate the message very strongly is for the government again to build confidence in Nigerian people. If you recall, President Buhari was one of those presidents who attended the London Anti-Corruption Summit in London. Coincidentally, it was 5 years ago when they made several commitments, and some of those commitments led to Nigerians signing on to the Open Government Partnership (OGP). And for me, that again demonstrates political will to do the necessary. But in terms of operational, how these commitments are impacting on the people in Nigeria is a different thing entirely. And that's why I think the government need to put their house in order. First, by way of what government have done now on asset return, they can also go beyond that on the issue of beneficial ownership policy government have put in place by the reform in the corporate CAC. That again sends the right signal. But what government need to move forward is by again putting in place this legal framework, which is the Proceed of Crime Bill. I think the president needs to take leadership. He needs to demonstrate to Nigerians that with that law, things can be ordered. Now, your question is that even when those legal framework are put in place, does it really mean that corruption will end? No, you can never eliminate corruption completely. We continue to put in reforms in place that will address any emerging corruption. For example, with the emerging power of the social media, there are quite a number of things that are coming up now. And some of our anti-corruption agencies are not well trained to respond to some of those new crimes that are emerging, particularly against the background that there's no investment in training and enforcement of most of this law. So my take would be that Nigerians should also see that anti-corruption fight is not just government-led alone. Civil society, religious leader, the media, just like what TVC is doing by creating awareness on this issue, is necessary. We need a broad coalition. We need a collective action for anti-corruption fight to be successful. Every countries around the world where corruption has succeeded, it is not just the government that leads it alone. I completely agree that government need to provide leadership, but the civil society, the private sector need to begin to work together to build a collective action around anti-corruption that will succeed and impact on the people. And the people must own the process. Ownership is fundamental for anti-corruption to be successful. And context is really relevant when you are discussing issues of corruptions in the country.
Well, before we look at interagency collaborations, you have been harping on the need to demonstrate leadership. That's the president, the need for him to demonstrate leadership. When you are talking about demonstrating leadership, paint us a picture of what you mean?
Well, in anti-corruption fight, that's what we properly refer to the political will. And, conceptually, it's difficult in literature to define what political will really means practically. But essentially, experts are beginning to interrogate the concept and begin to see what do you really mean by political will. For instance, the president was the one who initiated the Proceed of Crime Bill through the Ministry of Justice. The president needs to walk the talk. The current leadership of the National Assembly are members of his party, APC. And I think the president needs to reach out to the individuals and those leadership in the National Assembly. If the president is not doing that, we will say that the political will of the president is weak. If the president is not sending the right body language to his members of his political party, and they are not doing anything, after more than 8 years in power, or going to 8 years in power, nothing has happened with a legal framework that would have strengthened an anti-corruption fight, particularly against the background that the president was the anti-corruption champion of the continent, fighting illicit corruption. There is hardly any conferences that the president attended internationally without making references to the need for asset return to Africa. But you see, you must walk the talk. You must put your money where your mouth is. So what the president needs to send is to follow up by putting in place in the country. That is the only way the president can demonstrate. So if the president goes to international conferences and saying that they need support for illicit finance to stop in Africa, and then the legal framework that will help the country to engage in international corporations are not put in place, it doesn't make any sense internationally, and it doesn't send the right signal, and that we will say is also part of the weakness of the political will of the president. So in a short form, what the president has failed to do to this time is that the president haven't walked the talk. That's what has happened. The president haven't again follow up with the commitment he made in London in some of these cases. For instance, the issue of beneficial ownership, which now through the Haiti Secretariat, they are putting the policy in place now. The president needs to create a political momentum where his political party will begin to see it as one of their agenda that can help and galvanize the people of Nigeria to begin to see that this is what the promises that the president made when he was campaigning for election. And now that he's become a president, and this is exactly what he's doing with his men. And I think it is in the interest of the government. But like I said, the urgency of the need for government to put in place this legislative and anti-corruption reform agenda in the country is that financing of development has become a critical issue, particularly against the background of the coronavirus. To finance development now is a challenge. We have external debt problem. We have low flows of foreign investment into the country, and our traditional source of income from the oil sector is declining. In the face of all these challenges, any government that really want to finance development so that they can meet the human development capital of their country will need to do something urgently by putting in place the right anti-corruption reform framework. And nobody can drive this than the president and his political party. Right. And I think what the government needs to do, and which they have been doing, that need to be strengthened and be deepened, is to engage on this anti-corruption reform in a more lasting form.
All right. Because of want of time, we won't be able to delve into interagency collaborations and all of that. But we must thank you, David Ogala, Executive Director, African Network for Environment and Economic Justice, for your time on the program.
Thank you very much.